What crazy ass story do you need to tell? My dad went to secondary school with John Lennon and was a couple years older than him. Dad was known for playing the drums and being quite musical, and one day John asks him whether he'd like to be the drummer in a band he's forming. Dad was keen, but my granny said he needed to prioritize studying, and so he didn't join. The band formed and were called the Quarrymen, and I think a guy called Colin was the drummer instead of Dad, who I believe was later replaced by Pete Best and then Ringo as they changed to the Silver Beatles, and then the Beatles. I like to imagine that in an alternative universe my dad said yes and that was history. I don't even mind that I wouldn't have been born if this had been the outcome. He really deserved to have had that lifetime. Edit. Well, this got a lot more attention than I ever could have expected. I only joined Reddit a little while ago. Thank you to the 4 kind strangers who gave me a silver medal. I feel very honored. It's blowing my little mind that over 20k people have read this. It's been awesome to hear everyone else's near misses and chances of fate, and cheers for the many lovely comments about my story. Have a great day, chapsex. A little while back my roommate was contacted by a wealthy man in the area who wanted to pay her to be his live-in pet for an entire month. She thought that this was a cutesy way of saying that it was a sugar daddy baby arrangement. Turns out what he actually meant was that she would be given room, board and a very healthy allowance to spend a large portion of her day dressed as a cat, walking on her hands and knees, eating out of a bowl, using a litter box, and, yes, sleeping in a little cage at night. Sex wasn't even on the table. He was only interested in having a human cat for a month. She seriously considered the offer for a weekend, and then politely declined. Edit. This allowance would have covered her college tuition for the semester. He knew what he wanted and was very motivated. Years ago I was hitchhiking north of Richmond, Virginia when a car with 2 dudes picked me up. We got to chatting and it turns out they were headed to their friend's place to shoot guns and asked me if I wanted to join. I asked if his friend would be okay with a random homeless-esque fellow shooting his guns and he said hell, just pretend to be my cousin from Seattle. So instead of sitting on the highway in 100-degree weather I spent an afternoon eating hamburgers, shooting guns, and blowing up with bags of tannerite on some random employee's woodland property. Don't remember your name, dude, but you were the man. Thanks for a great memory. I used to go to a Korean middle school, so physical punishment for any bad behavior was expected. One day a few kids were talking in class, so our ass of a math teacher decided that we somehow all deserved to get punished. He told us to kneel on our desks and started hitting us on the thigh one by one. We all complained but figured we'd just get it done with and get back to class. But one of my classmates completely snapped. He pulled out a knife from his pocket, I'd ask why he had one, and put it towards the teacher's throat and threatened to kill him. That moment I was genuinely afraid I was about to witness a murder and was scared, but for some reason every single one of my classmates was laughing at this situation. I still don't understand why, but thankfully there was no murder. The kid just ran off to the front office. He realized he ducked up and came back begging for forgiveness. Somehow he never really ended up getting punished. The cops weren't called. No trial. No suspension. Nothing. He did get forced to transfer to a new school, but he didn't get hit with a single thing that would stay on his record. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check flight, close to the end of the program. I was doing the run-up in a Cessna, when I smelled something. Do you smell that? Smells like gas, I say. Instructor, 21YO, shrugs, annoyed. I open the door, and there is a spreading puddle of avgas under the plane. The instructor panics, stay in the plane, I'll get help, and runs off. As soon as I got the engine off, I noped out of there, and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane, an instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later, I read about the same plane crashing, due to fuel issues. 1 fatality, no significant repercussions for company. Nothing super amazing, but I, 26, am adopted. I have nothing to do with my biological family save for a half-brother, who I reconnected with last year. We're friends on Facebook. About a year and a half ago I spent 6 months as a pizza delivery driver. While there I met a man, probably in his 50s or so. We got along. He was a driver just for something to do since he's retired now. I quit the job 6 months in, but a couple months ago I came back and the guy is still there. A week ago my brother tags me on Facebook, as well as my coworker. A few days later I ask my coworker how he knows my brother. After a misunderstanding, my brother has the same name as his father. So when I asked, he thought I was talking about my brother's father. We found out that the coworker is actually my uncle by marriage, or was. He was married to my bio mom's sister for some 20 years, until their divorce a couple years ago. The guy used to babysit me when I was a baby, and has pictures of my brother and bio mom that he gave me. He's currently looking for baby pictures of me, because I don't have any from before I was adopted. My mom and dad would be super happy if he can find them. Edit. Went to bed an hour after posting and only like 8 upvotes. Row. Edit 2. I also just remembered I actually met the caseworker who handed me over a few years ago. 2. She was at my dad's work party. She remembered me and my brother, and everything. Edit 3. Here's this for the full story, since some people had questions. TLDR, since a couple mentioned it was a bit hard to follow along with. So, I'm adopted. And I met an older man at a pizza place that I've worked on and off for the past 2 years. Last year we connected with a half brother. They know each other on Facebook, so I asked my coworker what's up with that. Turns out he's my bio mom's sister's ex-husband. Used to babysit me and all that. Maybe his baby pictures of me that he can give me as soon as he can find them. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents, town in northern Australia. We started going to school and after a few weeks we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join. So on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined to go into the hall and all the kids are joking and laughing. They opened the doors and we all start walking in and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in I looked up and on the walls was all these signs. Sinners must burn. The devil is coming for you, Christ is your only savior, stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanticles in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet. He's under my feet. Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy looking old guy, who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said, "We are going." By this time it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a km from home I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as duck. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned nature rangers to us ever again. I stole my own car back once. I used to restore classic cars. I had the most valuable one I've ever had at a body shop, and he took forever to finish it. He had painted other cars for me, but apparently developed a drug problem. I would check on the car every week to see if there was any progress. Finally, after a year he told me he painted 90% of it, but he's asking for more money than we originally agreed. I drive there on a Friday afternoon unannounced, and see my car outside the shop, worth a ton of money, with the shop owner nowhere in sight. His neighbor told me he had left the car outside for 3 days and several people have tried to steal it. So I call a tow truck and tow it to my garage right away. On my home the shop owner calls me over and over again. He thought somebody stole the car. He kept calling me for months. I never responded. This happened in either the late 90s or early zeros. So my granddad got jiggy with another woman when he was on holiday once with a lady from Kiribati. Anyway, it produced a child, my aunt. Now several years ago my family decided that we would go and visit her in Kiribati. For those that don't know, it's on the equator. To get there we had to fly from Fiji on a tiny 50-seater twin-prop plane with one toilet at the front. Now being a kid with a lot of food allergies, I had eaten something that didn't quite sit right. Mild case of food poisoning if you will. About half an hour into our flight, my stomach gives me that feeling where you know you won't stop what's coming. So I got up and went to the toilet. Halfway up the aisle all hell broke loose. I farted. Which wasn't a fart. It was the beginnings of full-blown diarrhea. By the time I got into the toilet and locked the door, my undies were soaked. It was still flowing. I couldn't stop it. Now I was a good kid so I didn't want to block the toilet. So I threw my undies in the rubbish and unloaded into the toilet. However, the amount that came out plus the amount of paper I had to use ended up blocking the toilet anyway. And it stunk. Really badly. I would have been JN there for a good 15 minutes. Meanwhile the entire plane started stinking of it. I finished up and cleaned up best I could, but the toilet was done for. It was starting to overflow. I just slowly went back to my seat with the entire plane staring at me. Disclaimer. Back in the day there was a small amount of water with chemicals to flush with. Much more than there is today. A blocked opening means there's nowhere for the poo to go. And no vacuum to suck the air down. Because it's blocked. The more you press the lever the more chemicals, been saying water as it was faster to type, get pumped in. With the toilet blocked, there's nowhere for it to go except overflow. Now imagine the amount of paper I had to use to block an airplane toilet. And that's why it was blocked. I had to tell my dad what I had done and he spoke to the flight attendants who had to try clear the mess of a toilet with the water starting to splash onto the floor. It was horrible. We finally got to Kiribati and the plane had to be grounded while they disinfected and cleaned the whole plane as it started to sweat as soon as the heat from outside came in. The plane was delayed for a good while. I only remember this as my dad brought it up the other day in convo. He thought I put my undies in the toilet which blocked it. I had to assure him it was all TP and it TLDR it myself on a plane and made it get delayed. I was an exchange student in Poland a few years ago. I was freshly 18 and had almost no experience with alcohol. Third week of school. We had a dance and I decided to attend. It was not at all like the school dances we have in the US. First off, it was held at a club. Downtown. Little odd. But okay. Second, it had a bar. I was in the senior class in high school. And we were all 18. So we could drink. I was not ready for that at all. Third, I had just started smoking the week before. My high school had a smoking gazebo. And probably 1/3 of my class smoked. I started smoking to make friends lol. This turned into the perfect storm of me getting absolutely ducking it faced. After blacking out shortly, I was suddenly outside smoking, and my friends and I were walking to a nearby 24H liquor store. I walked in, visibly inebriated, and bought a mid-sized bottle of vodka. The cashier was hesitant, but when she heard I was American, basically just said duck it, go ham. Probably another 2 hours and another blackout later the police arrive. They start yelling at my class president for wandering in the road. For some reason drunk me decides I should get involved even though I barely speak Polish and am super ducking wasted. I walk up to the cop, and in the worst Polish I've ever spoken, tried to say leave him alone. But what came out was leave, and then a pile of vomit all over his boots. Oh duck, this is it I thought. I'm going to get arrested and deported. The cop looked at me and said in English, you an American? Yes sir, I replied knowing I was in deep it. The cop looked me up and down, looked at the bottle of vodka in my hand and said, you drink it vodka. Come with me. I was put into the back of the police car, and he started to drive away. My heart sank. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be the best year of my life, it was already over. But he stopped 2 blocks away. at the 24H liquor store, brought me inside, and bought me a 100ml bottle of Zabrowka vodka. He said, "This is good and cheap. Welcome to Poland. Now let me take you back to your friends." As we pulled back up to the club, he leaned back and said, "Watch this." He turned on the lights and siren and 3 or 4 kids ran down the block. He was laughing uncontrollably. He unlocked the door, and as I climbed out he shouted, "Be safe, friend." 20 minuets later I blacked out again, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the kitchen floor of the house I was living in, feeling like absolute it. My host mother had made coffee and said, "Damn, you had a night." And that was the craziest night I ever had. Sorry for formatting. I'm pretty at it. I got a pilot's license and flew across the country smuggling marijuana 4 times and then stopped. Now I work a normal job and I can't tell anyone about the coolest dumbest thing I've ever done. I work in a prison as a nurse. Frequently, our inmates insert beads, usually carved from dominoes, under the skin of their D shaft. It's called beading, and it happens a lot. Pretty much every unit has a D doctor, another inmate, who is particularly skilled in flaying open Ds and sticking beads inside of them. Or, some inmates say duck it, and try to do it themselves. We had an inmate who cut himself shaving. Yeah, okay, who had to come up to the medical department because his genitalia was bleeding. Obviously everyone's first thought is the dude was either trying to put in a bead, or take one out, and failed. So dude gets up to us and he's holding a towel down his pants, against his crotch, and everything is soaked in blood. Underwear, towel, pants, you got it, drenched. So I take him into an exam room and get his clothes off, and the dude goes, "It's mostly okay. I stitched it back up myself with my sewing kit." What? Yeah. He stitched his own cock up with a ducking sewing kit from commissary. Not only that, but he tied a string around his shaft as a makeshift tourniquet. I go, "Hey, you might want to take that string off of your D before it loses circulation and falls off." Anyway, we get the tourniquet off and I take out his itty stitches, and he starts spurting blood from his D like an active volcano. I've never seen so much blood come from a human being before. We had to burn his cock shut with silver nitrate. It was awesome. I love D bead stories. Don't know how interesting it is, but a few years ago I'd go to college in the morning and leave at like midnight because I didn't have a PC and needed to work on homework at school. One time on the last train ride home, I had to catch 2 trains and 2 buses each way to get there and back. We were coming into the last station where I'd get off. There was this Asian guy acting a bit strange the whole ride. He gets up and stands in the middle of the car, and as the train brakes coming into the station he falls flat on his face from a full standing position. Lays there until the train stops. Stands up, dusts himself off and walks out of the open doors like nothing happened. I saw this guy doing it like 5 other separate times, and since I was used to it at that point I enjoyed looking out for the uninitiated riders' reactions. Plenty more slightly weird stuff happened on my late night subway rides home. I really enjoyed the entertainment. I'm a pretty avid cyclist, which means whenever I have the time, I will ride my bike away from the city I live in, into the mountainous suburbs to challenge myself up some of the local climbs. It was another one of these excursions. I had just rode up and down a big ass mountain. The road headed back to the city center. I was fairly tired. Still had 40 kms to get back home. All of a sudden, I see traffic on the opposite lane stopped for some reason. What I immediately saw next I was not prepared for. I saw an ostrich on my lane, in front of me, running after the car ahead. WTF. It's not like the country I live in is habitat to any ostriches. Slowly, I follow the ostrich, which is running after the car ahead. Faced with a decision, do I overtake the ostrich? Now I'm no expert on ostriches, but I do remember reading that ostriches run really quickly, and that they can be aggressive towards humans. I don't want to become the victim of an ostrich attack, but I do want to get home quickly, as it was starting to get dark. After hesitating for a while, I gave it all I had and overtook the ostrich. The rest isn't that interesting. I managed to get home unharmed, but to this day, it remains one of my most surreal experiences, running into an ostrich on a bike ride. Edit. Blimey. This is my most upvoted comment by far. Hope you all had a good laugh like I did. My father used to live in Kazakhstan around 2006. One day he was with his work friend at a bar when this tall, built Russian man comes in. He decides he wants to sit in a bar stool close to my dad. But instead of finding a normal, empty stool he goes to a chair occupied by a small woman and literally throws her off the chair, exclaiming that he wanted that chair. My dad sees this and immediately attempts to intervene by saying, "Hey man, what the duck are you doing?" The Russian man then proceeds to tell my dad, "I'm going to kick the it out of you when you leave the bar etc." My father brushes it off, but then he notices that the Russian man's friends have started to join them. About 4 large men inside and another 4 outside. At this point my dad is nervous and decides to call the head of security, HOS, for the company he works for. Keep in mind my dad was the managing director of Kazakhstan at the time. The HOS tells my dad wait at the bar for him to come. And after some tense drinking with the work buddy, 30-some bodyguards start pouring into the bar, making a line from my dad to the exit of the bar. Because of the country they are in, the bodyguards all have pistols on them as well. So the 30-something bodyguards have made a wall of people either side of my father. After the HOS takes him to his car. But there was an additional 2 black BMWs that were there to escort my dad home. Not the most insane story, but it was insane to hear my dad tell it to me. He also said the urge to flip off the big Russian guys was massive, but he didn't want to risk it. Edit spelling is hard. I used to open letters for a state-run bureau. We had a dedicated unit of people just opening letters all day long by the ton. For some reason, a person not in the right mind started to send letters with human faces in them. Perhaps as a form of retaliation. I do not know. This went on for weeks, if not months. Certain units had to use disposable gloves and face masks in case of number 2 letters. For my inconvenience, I was one who had the honors to open one of this perpetrator's mail. This time it was different. Along with the poo, something rolled out of the envelope. Something shiny. With the aid of some hand disinfectant and paper towels, I cleaned this tiny, round and golden piece of metal. This poop person sent a gold coin from the 17th-19th century along with his excrement. The coin is small, around 2 grams, but it appears to be solid gold. I doubt that the person who lost this item is willing to get it back, since sending human feces to a bureau is considered a crime. The coin itself is not worth that much, but this is by far the most ridiculous story I have to tell from my previous mind-numbing job as a bureaucrat. And this, kids, is how I got myself a gold coin from a letter full of it. Edit. Did some editing. Obligatory types. Someone's it is others gold. When I was 19, I would deliver drugs for a friend of mine. One of the guys I delivered weed to worked at the local zoo. One day we decided to smoke up in the somewhat hidden area behind the indoor penguin enclosure. After the setch we went inside to find the penguins acting very weird. Turns out we were smoking right next to the air intake for said penguin enclosure. And that was the day I accidentally hotboxed some penguins. Many years ago in Galveston, Texas, I was attending the Kappa beach party. I'll get to the point. After an hour of being in the crunk area, I looked over to a woman holding her child in one arm and blowing 2 dudes with the other arm and mouth. Good night, friends. Edit. Don't let Galveston keep you from visiting Texas or Houston for that matter. I love my home. Galveston though. I was traveling in Honduras with a girl I was seeing. We were traveling with her sister and some other people, staying in a hostel. During the 15th of September celebrations in this little town, there were a whole bunch of festivities going on, so we went out and enjoyed the day. At night, walking back to the hostel, we started to fool around a bit. We were making out in the town plaza. We couldn't go back to the hostel to take it further since our friends were there, but it was really dark outside, and the town plaza had some columns and areas that were relatively private, so we just decide to have sex there. We start banging in between a couple of the columns. So she is leaning back against a column and we are kind of on the ground. After a little while, she starts shaking and I look at her and she has this weird look on her face and is shaking like crazy. I think, whoa, she is having the craziest orgasm I've ever seen. Then I felt a really strange sensation all through my legs. And I think, whoa, I'm having a really crazy orgasm too. I had this sensation I couldn't really place, but it was familiar. Then I place the sensation. Electricity. I realize I'm being electrocuted through my legs. I was wearing a condom. And I look at her and realize she is too. I pull us both to the side. I looked at the column she was leaning against, and there were exposed wires coming out of it. She was kind of crying and freaking out because she thought she was going to die and couldn't move. My parents are blind optimists. They think nothing bad will happen to anyone in our family. One day I got jumped by some losers in a gang. I go home and tell my parents and they look at me and say, "Well, there's fried chicken in the oven." Unbelievable. I was 14. Edit. You are all amazing people for reading my comment and caring about it enough to upvote it. I really am appreciative and astounded. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him. I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came and he walked into my office straight up to me and says he had a DRS appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing cause I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was the office next door and he left. A little while later I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes and on my way out he trailed behind me and I held the door for him. He said thank you, and that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. Edit. Y'all have really made my day with all this karma and silver. Thanks kind redditors. Here goes. It's quite a long one. I'm from Belgium and have traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger. When I was still together with my ex-GF, we traveled a lot as well, but neither of us had been to the USA. So we told this to a befriended couple and a few beers later we started planning a trip to go on together. Because another mutual friend was studying in Philadelphia for a year and we might as well go visit him. First we went to New York and Philly for a few days, then took a plane to LA, rented a car and took a road trip to Cali, Nevada and Utah. During this road trip we'd often laugh about some of the dumbit we'd heard or seen people do in America. We had a bunch of jokes about people in smaller villages and all the kind of crazy stuff they might do. We had just been to Sequoia National Park, and we were looking for a place to spend the night and eat, because it was getting late. Found some old farmhouse where we could stay in one of the fixed up cabins and asked the old lady who rented it to us where we could go and eat something. Mind you, this little town was called Pinehurst and had an extremely low population. She pointed us to the Pinehurst Lodge, which was basically the only restaurant bar store for miles. Went there, ate an amazing meal and decided to grab some drinks afterwards and shoot some pool. As we were playing pool, this old giant approaches us, wearing a jeans shirt that said George W. Bush. Picture of an eagle. He had a bushy mustache. Looked very tough for his age, and we thought he was going to give us trouble about using the pool table and laughing too hard. He is to this day one of the kindest people I've ever met. He asked if we were having fun and if he could join us. He bought us moonshine, which we obviously thought was hilarious, and we bought him a few beers as well. Had a blast the entire evening while we were playing and drinking. The phone behind the counter kept ringing, but none of us was paying attention to it. By 23:30, all of a sudden, a woman comes barging in with a gun in her hand, looks at us and stomps over. I felt myself getting nervous and getting ready to react if I had to. She stops behind our new friend, grabs an empty beer bottle and smashes it on his head. We were all perplexed with what happened. She proceeded to shout insults at the man and started hitting him. He calmly tells her to relax, turns towards us, shook our hands, told us that if we ever came back to be sure to let him know so we could hang out again, and then went outside with the woman as we stood there, still trying to understand what just happened. The woman at the bar just shouts at us, "That's his wife. He's a bit of a social butterfly," and she had already called 10 times to ask when he'd come home. Thought it was pretty cool and all. So we told her, "Oh, okay, we're just going to leave as well then. It's getting quite late." "Oh, no my dearies. It's best you stay a little while longer. The shouting you hear outside is still them arguing." And I can tell she's quite pissed at you guys because she blames you that he hadn't come home yet. And I have to say it wouldn't be the first time she shot at someone for keeping him too long at the bar. So best you stay a little bit until they leave. So we stay about 30 more minutes. All the while they keep shouting outside. Then we hear a car start and see a white truck speed off. Within seconds we see a second truck speed after the first one. This was in the mountains with very narrow and bendy roads. Both cars just leaving at an insane speed. We hear the bartender say, "She drives our children to school with the bus, you know. This would never happen at home. 100% would go back to Pinewood Lodge in a few years." Edit. It was Pinehurst. Check link in comments and can confirm that was the place. Also national park and not natural.